the rules and pass H.R. 2430.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2430, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to continue stocking fish in certain lakes in the North Cascades National Park, Ross Lake National Recreation Area, and Lake Chelan National Recreation Area.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Mrs. Christensen, and the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2430, introduced by the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee, Doc Hastings, directs the Secretary of the Interior to stock certain lakes in the North Cascades National Park with fish. Fish did not naturally inhabit any of the 245 lakes in the North Cascades of Washington because they are at such high elevations. But in the late 1800s, local officials began stocking some of these mountain lakes with non-native fish. By the late 1930s, the state had assumed management of this effort, and recreational fishing in these lakes became increasingly popular. In 1968, North Cascades was designated as a national park, and in 1988, the Stephen T. Mather Wilderness Area was set aside within the park. Now all but one of these lakes are located within the Mather Wilderness Area. Stocking continued, though, through a series of National Park Service waivers, but the National Park Service has made it clear that stocking will not continue unless the practice is specifically authorized by Congress. H.R. 2430 will provide that authorization. We have no objections to H.R. 2430, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2430 was introduced by the ranking Republican of the committee, Mr. Hastings of Washington, and has the bipartisan support of 5 other members of the Washington delegation. This legislation simply implements the recommendations of the National Park Service's 2008 final environmental impact statement on mountain lakes fisheries management in the North Cascades National Park. Beginning in the 1880s, 91 of the 245 lakes within the park complex have been stocked with trout. When the North Cascades National Park was created in 1968, the Park Service continued to allow fish stocking under the supervision of the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. To address subsequent questions about the environmental impact of stocking the lakes, the Park Service agreed to complete a NEPA review on fisheries management within the park. This review began in 2002 and resulted in a record of decision last year which concluded that fish stocking could continue in 42 of these lakes without adversely affecting native ecosystems. The legislation creating the North Cascades National Park specifically identifies fishing as an important recreational use. Although recreational fishing is called for in the Parks Enabling Act and stocking has continued throughout its existence, the Park Service has requested that this authority be specifically authorized for it to continue. H.R. 2430 adopts the 42 lakes identified in the Park Service's Environmental Impact Statement as a ceiling for fish stocking, directs the agency to work with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife to supervise this activity, and limits stocking to native or sterile fish. Passing this legislation will authorize fish stocking in limited circumstances in this particular park, rather than relying on a waiver from the Director of the Park Service to the agency's general policy against stocking lakes. This will ensure that allowing this activity to continue where it has been carefully reviewed and found to be appropriate does not set a precedent for other parks. Mr. Speaker, the National Parks, Forests and Public Lands Subcommittee held hearings on this legislation on April 24th of last year and it passed the House by voice vote on July 14th, 2008. This bipartisan legislation has been carefully and narrowly drafted and has the support of recreational advocates as well as state and local government. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. At this point, because he is currently flying back from Washington to Washington, D.C., and is unable to be here for this debate, I ask unanimous consent to put the statement of Congressman Doc Hastings, the author of the bill, into the congressional record. And I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Virgin Islands.
I reserve the balance of my time to Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
reserves the balance of her time.
I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virgin Islands.
I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2430? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.